Awad as commissioner for Faizabad. For the moment, though, he leaves our story. When news of the events at Meerut and Delhi reached Lucknow, the British were fortunate in that they had the right man in the right place. Sir Henry Lawrence, the Chief Commissioner, was an energetic and experienced administrator. He immediately put in place preparations for the defence of Lucknow, basing his position around his office, the Residency, centre of British government. Lawrence had no intention of repeating the mistakes of Cawnpore.
Here, Lawrence knew that if the mutiny happened, or rather when the mutiny happened, he had to have a strong position from which to defend. And so they set about preparing this position really with a will. Not only that, you've only got to look around the place to see strong buildings, and buildings which, with a little work by Fulton, the engineer commander, were able to be turned into really quite a formidable defensive position.
The Residency withstood a siege of 5 months, conducted by considerably larger, well-led and well-equipped forces. The buildings bear the scars to this day of the heavy cannon which battered them. Richard, this looks like a very formidable piece of artillery. I mean, is it from the period?
Yeah, it's dated 1854, so 3 years before, and would very likely to have taken part in the battle. But most of the time and most of the damage was caused by the rebels standing back and just thumping away with this sort of artillery, battering away. These shells didn't explode; they just battered the walls, penetrated the walls, took down roofs, and created a degree of mayhem like that.
Richard, you were talking just now about the impact of round shot on a building like this, and that presumably is a round shot from the sort of cannon we were looking at just now.
Yeah, and you can see that actually it hasn't destroyed the wall. It's gone in about 18 inches. No, about 12 inches or so. So this is really solidly built. Unless if all the rebels were going to do was stand back and thump it with artillery, providing the garrison had enough food, weapons, ammunition, they were able to last for some time, and they were going to be a really tough nut to crack for the enemy rebel forces.
This was the billiard room of the Residency. One of the defenders noted later that over 350 spent cannonballs were salvaged from this room alone. Yet Lucknow survived, even if its garrison could do nothing to help other beleaguered British positions across North India. By the summer of 1857, the British were on the back foot all over northern India. Meanwhile, the revolt against the British was spreading further and further across India, even into areas not governed directly by the British. We're now on our way to Gwalior, some 200 miles south of Delhi, and at that time an independent state, ruled by the Maharaja of Scindia. Richard Sherriff's ancestor, Major Francis Sherriff, was based here in 1857, commanding a detachment of the Maharaja's army. What we're trying to do is find a needle in a haystack. Richard's family papers are insistent that Major Sherriff, after he was killed by his own troops when they joined the mutiny, was buried in a local cemetery. But if so, where is it today? No one in the family has ever seen the grave or the cemetery. In London, we've tracked down a map of the Gwalior military base drawn up by British military engineers in 1876. The map shows 2 19th century graveyards, and Gopal, our guide, thinks he knows where at least one of them is. Very few graves here have survived the ravages of the Indian climate. But there's a clue. We find some graves dating from 1857. And then, an extraordinary stroke of luck. Our local historian and the tour guide are astonished. They've helped dozens of visitors from Britain look for missing family graves many times in the past without success.
And here, extraordinary enough, is Francis Sherriff's grave.
It's incredible. It's exactly how it was sketched by Colonel Meade in 1860.
Yeah. Battered, run down, covered in undergrowth, surrounded by water buffalo, and very unloved. And I think also, he's surrounded by officers, all of whom are having dinner with the brigade. They knew the mutiny was going to happen. On that Sunday, the 14th, Mrs. Copeland, whose husband is buried just there, says in her book, An Escape from Gwalior, that she knew something was going to happen that day, because when they went to church, none of the sepoys saluted them. And sure enough, the officers' mess in the lines was burnt down that day. And because of that, the officers had dinner with the brigade commander. And at about 9 o'clock at night, they heard firing coming from the lines. And that was obviously the signal for the start of the mutiny. So the brigade commander turned to his dinner guests, amongst whom was Francis and Major Blake and all the officers who are lying here now, and said, "Right, gentlemen, do your duty." After the Subadar eventually had gone, one of the sepoys, crowding round Sheriff, said to another, alluding it was supposed to an oath they had taken not even to spare their own families if their religion was endangered, "Don't you see your father before you shoot him?" The sepoy fired immediately, and as Sheriff fell to the ground, other sepoys also discharged their muskets at him. So that was the end of it.
I will give my time. I'm not rich, but you believe me, God promised, I will not eat a single penny. Whatever will come will go to this.
And now that Major Sheriff has been found again by his family, it's time to pay a tribute to the dead in a very suitably Indian way. Several hundred miles to the east of the British station of Fyzabad, Colonel Philip Goldney, my ancestor, re-enters the story. Our starting point, as in Gwalior, is the overgrown cemetery beside the Fyzabad garrison church. Well, it's been a fairly dramatic morning so far in Fyzabad, where we've been trying to find some relics of Philip Goldney. Richard and I have spent about 3 hours with senior Indian Army officers trying to get permission to shoot this and shoot that, and they keep on referring it up to divisional level, who refer it on to brigade level, and so on and so forth. It has been extremely frustrating. However, we have encountered one colonel who very charmingly has been of great help to us and encouraged us and is taking up our cause. The interesting irony of this is that his family were 5 generations in the Indian Army, and the first generation was executed as a mutineer at Peshawar. I'm not expecting to find Philip Goldney's grave. I know he died in an attack on a boat about 12 miles downriver from the town, but there may just be a memorial to him here. No such luck. We can't find any graves from the 1857 period at all. But what I do have, from family papers and contemporary records, is a clear account of the last 2 days of his life. And we've got, as in Gwalior, a detailed period map of the area. One of Goldney's duties was to act as a local magistrate. At the beginning of June 1857, he presided over a trial, the importance of which neither he nor anyone else could have foreseen. In May 1857, he was in Fyzabad conducting a very unusual and interesting trial. There was a man called the Maulvi of Fyzabad, who was a Muslim, Ahmadullah Shah, who had been circulating around among the garrison in Fyzabad, urging them to rise up and throw off the British. He was, if you like, an early jihadist. He was captured by the British and put on trial in front of Commissioner Goldney, who sentenced him to death, and he was duly sent to Fyzabad jail, which is all we can see behind us now is just ruins, sent to Fyzabad jail to await execution. But in fact, he didn't stay inside for long. The Maulvi went on to become one of the most effective military leaders of the mutineers. From family documents, we have a good idea of Goldney's state of mind at this time. While trying to organise some defences at Fyzabad, he took the precaution of writing his will. On the 7th of June 1857, in the officers' mess of the 22nd Native Infantry here at Fyzabad, there was a special commemorative mess dinner And after supper, Colonel Goldney shook hands with all the officers in the mess and said, "If any of you survive this, please, would you tell other people that I tried to do my duty?" The troops at Fyzabad mutinied during the night of 8th June and seized their officers, including Philip Goldney. Surprisingly, given what had happened elsewhere, the British were not murdered, but were instead locked up.
On the 9th of June, after a very uncomfortable 24 hours spent in the quartermaster's jail in Fyzabad, Philip Goldney and his colleagues were told that they would be allowed to go away in boats. They were brought down to here, and at this stage the mutineers who'd been looking after them abandoned them to go and pillage the treasury, which was not very far away. So they got into the boats and they rowed off down the river.
One of the lesser-known facts of 1857 is that if a large number of Indians had not taken Britain's side, British India would have vanished then and there. In military terms, about half the force that took Delhi and defended the Lucknow Residency were Indians. On a personal level, a large number of individual Britons were saved by acts of extraordinary bravery on the part of numerous ordinary Indians. We're on our way to find the most extraordinary twist of the Goldney tale, deep in the Indian countryside south of Fyzabad. Philip Goldney had left his wife Louisa and their 3 youngest children, including Thomas, aged 10 but later to be my great-grandfather, in their quarters at Sultanpur, in the belief they would be safe there. Louisa, as wife of the senior officer on the station, tried to keep everyone calm, but in a private account written in 1858 for her elder children, she confessed to her real fears. It was a case, she said, of stay and be murdered or go and be murdered.
When the mutiny happened at Sultanpur, Mrs. Goldney, Louisa Goldney, had to flee very swiftly. And she'd got a message from a Raja Madhu Singh saying, "Please come and stay in my house, I can keep you safe." Now, his house was just on the outskirts of the village of Amethi, which is where we are now, and we think that is his house behind, so we're going to go and see if any of the descendants of Raja Madhu Singh are in the house.
Amazingly, our guide Rajendra has managed to track down the home of the descendant of the Raja, Dr. Sanjay Singh, a former Indian government minister. And we're now outside the front door. Do the buildings that are outside there, the buildings over there, they are his buildings, are they?
वो जो बगल में जो बिल्डिंग वो किसकी है?
Yes.
In this compound, yeah.
We weren't able to meet Dr. Singh as he was away at the time. It's not easy today to appreciate just how dangerous Louisa's and the Raja's positions were. A regiment of mutineers was encamped for some days in front of the Raja's fort. Louisa and her children were not allowed into the main building for fear of discovery, but we have a detailed account of where she hid and found a building which matches her description perfectly.
After wandering around for a good few hours, we actually reckon we found the right place. It fits the bill perfectly, which is a bit of luck. It's half covered, the windows are high enough so that someone from outside wouldn't be able to see in.
They were looked after wonderfully by the Raja, and he sent food out to them, and he sent beds out to them, and he sent them clothes so they could work on their clothes and everything else. But they spent 2 very, very tense weeks cooped up in here, not able to get out, not knowing what was going on in the world outside, and unable to move for fear that the mutineers would find them. Thanks to the Raja of Amethi, I and my children now exist. As we leave Amethi, heading back towards Delhi, there's suddenly an opportunity to try out one aspect of mid-19th century soldiering. Well, any army is only as good as its transport, and the war of 1857 is very much about a lot of mobility, troops moving all over the place, trying to keep ahead of your enemy and everything else. And to be honest, the British Army sometimes had to rely on fairly, shall we say, simple means of getting around.
Yeah, I mean, Canning's problem was to get as much force, and the Commander-in-Chief's problem was to get as much force up country as possible, because they were woefully short of British troops. And as reinforcements came into Calcutta, so the problem then was to get them up country as quickly as possible. It was a combination of steamer, because of course the Ganges was navigable up to Allahabad, and thereafter bullock cart, or Shanks's pony. The planning assumption, interestingly enough, for a bullock cart was 30 miles a day, and looking at that one...
Let's test it, shall we? Ah, well... Hold it. Face it forward. 3 or 4 miles an hour is good going for a bullock cart, but this bullock seems to have got the bit between its teeth. We suspect it may be showing off for the camera. Meanwhile, back in Delhi, by midsummer 1857, the real battle for India was about to begin. It did not start well for the British, as the mutineers launched a succession of effective attacks on the ridge. Conditions there were awful. A plague of flies settled everywhere, making eating very difficult and adding to the discomfort of the wounded. More important was that the force gathered here did not have the numbers or the siege guns needed to break into Delhi successfully. Failure in front of the walls of Delhi would have ended British rule in India forever.
The more Delhi remained a centre for the mutineers, the more likely it was to act as an encouragement for other units in the Bengal Army to mutiny. They had to exist up here throughout the long hot summer, and we're both sweating like pigs. It's damn hot here, fighting in this sort of weather. The mutineers were reinforcing Delhi constantly as a result of mutinies in other parts of India. He had huge logistic problems by being here. I mean, we haven't touched on the medical side. I mean, they died like droves with cholera and other diseases and heat exhaustion up here. If Barnard had gone for Delhi quickly with a quick and dirty operation, there's a really good chance that it would have forestalled the mutinies across the rest of India.
By midsummer, the number of British forces on the ridge was growing steadily. What galvanised the British into action was the arrival of John Nicholson, a dynamic giant of a man who had made his reputation pacifying the Punjab. Extraordinarily, Nicholson had been given the field rank of brigadier at the age of only 34. The arrival, a couple of weeks later, of a train of heavy siege guns sealed Delhi's fate. When the end came, it was surprisingly quick. On the 12th of September, more than 50 British heavy guns and mortars opened fire on the walls of Delhi. Within a day, they were crumbling. But one obstacle had to be removed before any assault on the city could be contemplated: the heavily defended Kashmir Gate. Delhi historian and writer Rajesh Rampal joined us to guide us through the final attack on Delhi.
Well, it was on the night of the 13th September 1857 that Archdale Wilson asked his engineer officer Baird Smith that he wanted a direct route into the city. And the direct route was to be provided by blowing up the Kashmiri Gate. And the gate was actually here. The gate was not actually outside, but it was here. And the charges had been kept over here. And it was John Smith who found a place where nobody could shoot him. Because when he stood in this place, nobody could shoot him from the top. Nobody could shoot him from the ramparts over there. And he found that the charge was going to blow up any time, and he jumped into the moat. And when the charge blew up, it blew open the gate, this particular gate, and it fell on the inside because the masonry gave way. And you can also say that the future of India rested on this hinge.
Once the breach in the Kashmir Gate had been made, columns of troops, one of them led by Nicholson, poured into the city. To start with, they made good progress, and the force commander, Brigadier Wilson, moved his headquarters into St James's Church, next to the Kashmir Gate. But the resistance of the mutineers stiffened by the minute, and the British columns suffered heavy casualties in brutal house-to-house fighting.
In the evening, when he came to know about the number of casualties in the British forces, which amounted to roughly 1,100 men, and they just occupied about half a kilometer of the ramparts on that particular day, and the casualties were 1,170 men, including 66 officers.
The Delhi force's greatest hero, Brigadier Nicholson, was shot in a small back passageway.
This is exactly the point where Nicholson fell on the 14th of September 1857. He took out his sword and raised it ahead and said, "Follow me." But before anything would happen, a bullet came from the rooftop somewhere there, and it hit him under his armpit. The bullet was embedded in his body. It didn't come out of his body, and he fell, and he was dragged into the